This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the stage is set for a possible Israel-Iran confrontation. How will the Biden administration respond? And biblical Judea and Samaria encourage Washington to stick with Trump's course. And Holocaust remembrance at Israel's heart-wrenching memorial. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from a cold and rainy Jerusalem with the Mount of Olives and the Old City of Jerusalem behind me. Well, given the political chaos in Washington, you can understand why Americans might not be paying attention to what's happening here in the Middle East. Yet the stage is now being set for a possible military confrontation between two players in the region, Israel and Iran. And it may be one of the first major foreign policy challenges of the new administration. As the Biden administration seeks a new path with Iran that could bring back the 2015 nuclear deal, Israel is sending its own signals to the regime. IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kohavi has announced the military will have plans ready to strike Iran's nuclear program.
We're taking care of these plans and developing them during the coming year. Those who decide on carrying them out, of course, are the political leaders. But these plans have to be on the table, existing, ready, and practiced.
Israeli leaders see the 2015 Iran deal as flawed, that would only pave the way for the regime to develop a nuclear bomb. For its part, Iran is pushing limits with plans to take uranium enrichment to a level just below weapons grade.
Iran is provoking a conflict. I think a big question is whether President Biden and his team can figure out a way to stop them. Negotiation would be a good way to do it. Nobody wants a war in this region again, but Biden is going to be tested.
Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg says Iran is telegraphing intentions by taking rogue action. The regime recently seized the South Korean tanker and its crew near the Strait of Hormuz. Rosenberg says it's important that Biden and his team of advisors learned from the mistakes of his former boss, such as not including regional players like Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and the Saudis when negotiating the Iranian nuclear deal.
But also the flaws in the deal that didn't deal with missiles, that didn't deal with terrorism, that didn't deal with any of these other issues, and left all these loopholes.
Loopholes like Iran's widespread use of proxies across the Middle East, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq that have attacked U.S. troops there.
The Iranian art of war is based on fighting on other people's lands by other people's hands.
Israeli Reserve Brigadier General Asaf Orion says the biggest factor shaping the Middle East right now is America's transition of power.
Trump gave the Iranians the impression that he's pretty unpredictable.
According to Orion, the Iranians took extreme caution about launching attacks against the U.S. with Trump in office.
The stage is set for the Biden administration. While we focus on the nuclear as the most severe threat, we shouldn't overlook Iran's dual strategy of doing also indirect proxy warfare across the Middle East.
Rosenberg adds Biden must keep maximum pressure on Iran to create the right conditions to negotiate and avoid war.
All eyes are going to be on Biden. And if he flinches in the light of Iran's intransigence, it's going to be a very troubled season ahead.
As the Biden administration sets its agenda, Israel will likely see a number of changes from when former President Trump held the office. Israelis living in Judea and Samaria are especially concerned about what that might mean for the biblical heartland. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl explains why.
This is the Sagot Winery, about 10 miles north of Jerusalem.
Jews and wine go together. For us, wine is holy. We have a special blessing for wine. Every event in Jewish life, if you don't have any wine, you don't have the event.
In 2003, Yaakov and Naama Berg started this winery based on ancient tradition. They recently moved to this new site.
At the entrance, we chose to put a little bit of like a small exhibition. You can see here old jars, 3,000 years old. There was a big wine industry on those days. The wine that's produced here were shipped to Rome, to Europe, to Jerusalem.
The winery is in Sha'arei Benjamin, the gates of Benjamin in Judea and Samaria. Some people say the Jewish people don't belong here, but in the Bible, Jonathan, the son of King Saul, fought a famous battle against the Philistines in the valley behind me. The Trump administration acknowledged Israel's connection to the land. Over a year ago, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State at the time, declared Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria would no longer be considered illegal.
When you share common faith, it's very strong. And with faith also you can change the world. And I think President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, they changed the history.
Other unprecedented moves included recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. Embassy there, actions that angered Palestinians, causing them to cut ties with the U.S. President Biden has now restored those relations, as well as unconditional funding to Palestinian refugees. He also plans to return to the old peace process formula.
If someone wants to develop this area, to solve the problem, the way is not to separate Arab and Jews with dividing the area and build borders. The right way, it's like what President Trump did. He talked about let's invest in the area, let's develop the area.
Israel Gantz, governor of the Benjamin Regional Council, says Israel must be the sovereign power here.
God brought us here not to take his holy land and to bring it to someone else.
Berg said Trump had made morality into reality.
President Trump was the first president saying the simple truth. We, the Jewish people, we came back to our homeland after 2,000 years that we've been dreaming, we've been praying.
Coupled with that morality was Trump's business sense.
He says, listen, today it's the best deal. Tomorrow it will be worse. Everybody wants to sign a deal the same day. Nobody can argue the results.
The Berg's winery produces 750,000 bottles of wine each year, exporting 70% to more than 20 countries. Soon, thanks to the Abraham Accords, there will be one more, the UAE.
Wine represents more than just a drink. It's a culture, something very deep. So I think we have the ability to be very successful in our relationship with the Emirates.
The Accords open the way for business between Israel and several Muslim countries.
It's a real change that instead of talking about take this holy land and divide it, which means borders and wars and hospitals, instead of that we are talking about what's common.
Despite the disputed status of Judea and Samaria and the fact that most Muslims don't drink alcohol, the UAE is planning to import Israeli wine. More than 2/3 of the Arab Emirates population is from other countries. Gantz believes the Abraham Accords will bring a better life for Jews and Arabs alike.
Now Abraham Accords talking about prosperity. Everyone that really want to help the people here should invest in this area.
Gantz says the world is focused on this area because it's the heart of the world. Both he and Berg hope Biden will see that the recent changes are working and follow suit.
Coming up, a South African perspective on whether or not Israel is an apartheid state. The Jewish state is often accused by anti-Israel advocates that Israel is an apartheid state, just like the South African regime that ruled from the 1940s to the 1990s. The latest example is a report called A Regime of Jewish Supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea by the NGO B'Tselem. I spoke with South African-born international law expert David Benjamin about that comparison. Well, David Benjamin, thanks for joining us about this story on the whole idea of apartheid. You're an attorney, specialist in international law. Tell us, and you're also from South Africa. Tell us what apartheid was like in South Africa.
Right. Well, obviously, I wasn't a victim of apartheid. You could have said I enjoyed the fruits of apartheid, but I was certainly a witness to the iniquities of that terrible system. And let me be absolutely clear, I've been living in Israel for the last 30 odd years, and there is absolutely nothing in common between the system of apartheid that applied in the old South Africa and the current situation in Israel. There's plenty of room for criticism about Israel today, but to compare it with apartheid is outrageous, and it's libelous. In fact, you could call it even a blood libel, because it's so completely inaccurate and non-representative of the truth.
Yeah. A well-known NGO just came out with a report about accusing Israel of being apartheid. What's your reaction to that report?
Well, my first reaction is, again, being familiar with what apartheid really was, is that this is an affront to all the victims of the real apartheid, because to compare the situations is completely untenable, and it's quite clearly being done for a political motive. But that whatever one might think of the motive, which B'Tselem makes very clear, which is ending what they call the occupation, or the Israeli military presence in the territories, that doesn't justify anything, and it certainly doesn't justify a blood libel and an outrageous comparison to the iniquitous system of apartheid. So I would say, first of all, it's an absolute insult to those who did suffer under apartheid.
Oh, David, how would you describe the status right now of Israeli Arabs living within Israel?
Well, first of all, Israeli Arabs have full equality under the law in Israel. In fact, there is only one aspect in which even B'Tselem has to acknowledge there might be a question. And to me, it's not a question. And that is the definition of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, and the fact that it prioritizes immigration of Jews to Israel over immigration of other nationalities. Now, one has to remember that the Jewish state, its whole raison d'etre, the reason it exists, the reason the international community supported the establishment of Israel, was to solve what was then called, and I'm sorry for the term, but it was called the Jewish problem. The fact that Jews were simply unwelcome in so many countries in the world, and almost everywhere where Jews were living, they were subject to persecution. And of course, they suffered the worst crime against humanity ever perpetrated in the history of the world, which was the Holocaust. And it was thought that the solution to that is to have a Jewish homeland where Jews can go. So in other words, that's just part of the definition of Israel, is that Jews can immigrate to Israel. That does not make Israel an apartheid society, and it certainly doesn't harm the rights of people who are not Jews who live in Israel.
One thing that people that accuse Israel of being an apartheid state is the wall. And they see they call that an apartheid wall. And they also talk about the lack of access from Palestinian Arabs into Israel. How would you address that? What the wall means? The optics look very bad, but how would you explain the presence of the wall?
Yes, it's unpleasant. The optics, as you say, are not good. We would love to live in a world where walls were unnecessary. But in the reality, when that wall was built, where there were tens of terrorist attacks every day, there was over 1,000 Israeli victims of suicide bombings. That wall brought about effectively pretty much the end of the suicide bombings. So it's a security-based consideration. It's nothing to do with supremacy of one group over the other, or racism, or anything like that.
Up next, an exclusive tour of Israel's Holocaust Memorial for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Much of the world marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day online recently, honoring the memory of the 6 million Jews who died at the hands of the Nazis. And while tourists have not visited Ya드바셈 for nearly a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Managing Director Shaya Ben Yehuda gave CBN News an exclusive tour of Israel's Holocaust Memorial. Here's an excerpt from that tour. Shaya, we're here in the museum. Tell us where we start here in the museum to tell the story of the Holocaust.
We start here actually listening to children, Jewish children in Munkach, 1938, singing Hatikva. And whenever I see it, I have tears in my eyes. Because when you see those children, that most of them didn't survive, you understand what was the Jewish world before the Holocaust, what happened to the Jewish world. Then you understand what is our responsibility. The chapter in Psalms that is coming to my mind is chapter 130 in the book of Psalms, Shir LaMa'alot, a song of ascent. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. We come here and we'll start crying. We cry for what happened to humanity, what happened to those who were created by the image of Lord, that they forgot that they were created by the image of Lord and they have decided to take life of others. My mother was born in Germany. She grew up before Hitler came to power. But she witnessed what happened in Germany when Hitler came to power. She witnessed how this atrocity was developed. She saw how Jews were taken out of schools, how they were not able to be part of the society anymore. She saw the ideology, and she saw how her father was not able to continue to keep his business in Germany anymore. As years moved forward, reality got worse and worse for the Jews. And here we see the story, a little bit of the story of what happened on summer 1941 when the mass murder started. And we have to ask ourselves how those people could participate in this crime, how they took the decision to destroy life, how they have decided that the Jews are subhuman that have no right to exist. And following this conference, the Wannsee Conference, the final solution was implemented. Jews were sent to the death camps. Jews were sent death camps that were created by the Nazis in order to kill all the Jews. Yaddvashem has collected till today 4.8 million names of the 6 million people who perished during the Holocaust. And this place was created in order to give us a deep understanding of what happened. 600 images representing the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust. Babies, children, elderly, religious, non-religious.
But unfortunately, we see anti-Semitism rising in the world. We all know where anti-Semitism or hatred in large starts. We never know where it ends. We're also commanded in the Bible to always remember, because we always have to look backwards to remember where we come from, what happened, to make sure that the world would be a better place.
What is the lesson today because of the anti-Semitism that's still in the world today?
To stand up and not to be quiet. Wherever you see atrocity, wherever you see anti-Semitism or any other hatred, please stand up and make your voice. And sometimes voice is not enough. You have to be active in order to stop those atrocities.
Still ahead, a likely Christian souvenir from the Holy Land from 1400 years ago. The Israel Museum recently revealed the existence of a rare token that was likely a memento of a Christian's trip to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, at least 1400 years ago. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl explains.
They're called Eulogia Tokens, small souvenirs that Christians collected on pilgrimages to the Holy Land.
I'm holding a miniature token that used to belong to a 6th or 7th century pilgrim that came here and do a journey. We have here the nativity scene, so he probably visited Bethlehem.
Here in the archaeology wing of the Israel Museum, they have a reconstruction of an early church from the Holy Land. They also have items that show that pilgrims from way back then wanted to take souvenirs back with them, just like they do today. Assistant curator Morag Wilhelm discovered this rare piece in a large collection that had been donated to the museum.
We can see Jesus, the baby Jesus, and also the ox and the S, but they are inside architectural building. And we think that this building is the Church of the Nativity.
The souvenirs were made of earth taken from holy sites. This one is unique because Mary and Joseph are not in the picture, and it's likely depicting the cave under the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. That makes it a combination of the historical event from the birth of Jesus and a depiction of a place a few centuries later.
So this combination is very rare in the case of Bethlehem. We have it here in Jerusalem, but from the Holy Sepulchre, but not from Bethlehem.
Christians have been making pilgrimages to places mentioned in the Bible for at least 1,700 years. In one historical writing, the church father St. Jerome relates the story of a woman from Rome named Paula. Then she entered the cave of the Savior and saw the stable where the ox knew his master and the ass his Lord's manger. Then she solemnly declared in my own hearing that, with the eyes of faith, she saw a child wrapped in swaddling clothes, weeping in the Lord's manger.
So we guess that we are seeing here, it's this special visualization or religious experience that you go to the holy place and you actually see baby Jesus in the cave of Bethlehem.
Other tokens depict the baptism of Jesus and the crucifixion and resurrection. There are small vials for oil and crosses, pendants, and rings. And while coronavirus may have closed down international travel for now, when the gates reopen, tourists and pilgrims are sure to return to Israel and the Holy Land. Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Israel Museum, Jerusalem.
Perhaps if you come here to Israel, you can visit this extraordinary museum. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.